to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days.
Oh, yeah.
Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back
old school. Let's go right back in the day. Let's
Let me take you back.
Let's go right back in the day. Sing.
Let me take you back to the good old days. Let me take you back. Toi whatalofa tu Samoa I lo sila mai moa malimutu Pasifika. Ni sambolovinaka ke muni sakana wekanda mai viti. Tina koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa. Welcome everyone to Talanoa Tupe. This is a show where we highlight Pacific success. We are joining you today from Tāmaki Makaurau, and our guest is Lisa Tai, a director at Deloitte, which is one of the big four accounting firms. Lisa is also Deloitte's Pasifika lead and has over 14 years experience working in the areas of risk, integrity, and financial crime. She is passionate about working on capability building initiatives that enable Pacific communities to thrive. Noia, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Noia, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited about our talk today because I know that you've been doing a lot of work in terms of building capability within the Pasifika community, and also within your own firm, you're helping to increase the cultural competency of your colleagues. But before we get into all of that, let's start at the beginning. And can you tell us about your family?
Sure. So I'm the youngest of three. So I was born in Fiji. My mum is from the village of Itamata in Rotuma. My dad is from southern Fiji, but is also part Chinese. So born in Fiji, in Suva. I have an older brother called John and an older sister, Emily. And so we migrated to New Zealand back in 1987. So when I was about 4 years old. So a relatively small family in terms of number of siblings, but have a really big extended family back in Fiji and Rotuma.
And what was that experience like for you migrating to a new country at the age of 4?
I was relatively young at the time, so I don't remember too much about it. And when we first moved here in 1987, we actually moved here on the day of the first ever lotto draw in New Zealand, which my dad reminds me about all the time. Yeah. So I don't remember in terms of the challenges and things directly, but I sort of hearing from my brother and my sister, my parents, about what it was like. And I think could be described as a really daunting experience moving to a country where you don't have any family, you don't have any friends, you've never been there, it's cold, it's in the middle of winter. So daunting, but sort of the memories that I do have moving here with not much. And moving here and starting off in a caravan, my dad's boss's property in Kumeu, West Auckland, they're pretty humbling memories that I do have. So not a lot, but I imagine it was really difficult for my brother and my sister. So when my brother came here, he would have been a teenager and went straight into high school. So I imagine we've had different experiences in terms of the age and stage that we were at when we moved here.
And are there a lot of Rotumans in New Zealand?
Quickly growing, still one of the smaller ethnic groups in terms of Pacific and New Zealand. So it's awesome to see growth in the Rotuman community, but still relatively small. When we first moved to New Zealand in the 80s, not many other Rotuman families, but because my dad is Fijian, we're from Fiji, it's been awesome to connect with both the Rotuman and Fijian communities in Auckland.
And did language play, like Rotuman or Fijian language, did that play a part in your upbringing?
So at home we speak English. So my mum is fluent Rotuman, speaks Rotuman to her family, speaks Rotuman really, really well. My dad, Fijian, Chinese, his language at home was English as well. And so in our household, English was the only common language that my parents had. So the only time we heard Rotuman growing up was if my mum was, talking to the aunties on the phone or calling back home. And the only time we heard Fijian was if they were probably talking about us.
Classic. Cool. And so nevertheless, that played a big part in your identity.
Yeah, I'm really, really proud to be Ratuman, Fijian, Chinese. So while I've got a bit of work to do in terms of the language, sort of identity and culture is something that I think, I'd like as a defining part of me. And so I really respect the culture and the values that my family have. Language, I think, is really important. And sort of, do need to do a bit more work to be deliberate around picking up the language, especially now that I have kids. But culture and all the values is something that I think, makes me different in the workplace, especially.
Yeah, that's something that I really relate to, being, Samoan, Fijian, not having access to the language, the common language at home being English, but also just having this desire to learn more about the culture and to learn more about the languages now that I'm an adult. So what are the aspects of the culture that you have, and then also your husband's culture that you are trying to pass on to your children?
So we've got a bit of a fruit salad at home. So my husband is Samoan, Kiwi-born Samoan Junior. So we've got a mix of Ratuman, Fijian and Samoan cultures that we're trying to keep alive at home for our two kids. So Kalani, who is 7, going on 17, and then Kanoa, who is 4. So I think probably the thing that's making the biggest difference at the moment is making sure that they have time with their extended family, including their grandparents. And so the more time that we can, spend with family, and they sort of learn it by being around it, being the presence of people who have a lot more knowledge about culture than we do, I think is probably the biggest step that we can take at the moment. It's not through a lack of resources though. There's a lot of resources out there at the moment around Ratuman and Fijian culture and language that I think we need to be a little bit more deliberate in exposing our kids to, but letting them hang out with their cousins, their aunties, their uncles, their nana and papa, I think, is an awesome way to share knowledge and to make sure that they are exposed to all the values and things that make Pacific really awesome.
Yeah, I think like spending that time with your family and your grandparents, that's probably the original way that people can have exposure to the language. But I think now that particularly since there's an innovation fund that the Ministry of Pacific Peoples run, there are a lot more resources now available in different Pasifika languages. So I think that's really awesome. And I think it's kind of a big difference to when we were growing up.
100%. And I think the other way is church. So my parents are, members of the Fijian Catholic community. We go along as well to Mass. And so, sort of that's an awesome way as well to learn about culture and language, meeting other Fijians and Ratumans in that space. So for us, being a strong Catholic family, church has, I think, a big role to play in terms of culture as well.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So because your husband's Samoan, and then you have, I guess, the Ratuman, Fijian, Chinese ethnicities, like what areas of commonality have you noticed amongst, the different ethnicities that you both bring to the table?
Probably the key ones for our household has been family, just sort of the importance of family, faith. Both come from strong Christian and Catholic families as well, and probably also just the value of hard work. So on both sides, we've got really good examples in our families of what it means to work hard, to try your best, to succeed by doing. And so I think those are, while we have different languages and cultures, I think values is something that connects us all in the Pacific. And but for me, probably the importance of family, I would say, is the number one.
Yeah. And can I just ask, which ethnicity do your children identify most with?
I'm going to say Ratuman. I'll say Ratuman. If you ask them, they actually go through it. They'll be like, I'm Ratuman, I'm Fijian, Samoan, and I'm Chinese.
Awesome.
And so they don't say the Kiwi. They say that they're, a mix of those 4 things. So depending on the day that you ask them, I would hope that they would say all 4.
Yeah. I think identity is like a journey, like a lot of people I talk to, and also like I know from my own experience and trying to figure out who I was, that's something that can take a long time to process.
100%. I think even for me, while don't identify as being a Kiwi. So I say I'm returning Fijian predominantly. I've got so much to learn, right? Like in terms of what that journey looks like for myself. And yeah, I hope to learn more. I want to make sure that I'm here to pass it on to my kids. I think, an ethnicity group like Ratuman, there aren't that many of us around, so it's actually a real privilege to be able to learn the language and culture and, help make sure that the next generation do an even better job at maintaining the strength of our cultures.
Have you ever been to Rotuma?
No. No, I really want to. It's definitely at the top of the list. It has been a bit of a mission to get there. So from New Zealand, you would need to fly to Fiji and then catch a 3-day boat ride to Rotuma.
Wow.
And it's not a cruise ship, it's a oil tanker like type ship. So I think the journey to get there has probably put, or made it quite difficult to get to Rotuma so far. But now that Rotuma has a new airstrip and you can actually catch flights from Fiji to Rotuma, I have no excuse. So as soon as those borders open up, I'm really keen to get there and to get there while I still have family there. And while my mum is around and can actually do that journey with us would be really awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a bit of a pilgrimage for you and your family.
Yeah, because I feel really connected to it. I think it's quite strange to feel connected to a place that you've never been before, but for me, that's where my mum's home is. That's where my aunties and uncles still live. So I can't wait. And to take my kids there would be awesome.
I think that's an experience a lot of Pasifika can relate to, feeling so strongly connected to the motherland when you haven't actually been there before.
100%.
So what did you study at school, and were you always interested in the field that you're in now?
No. So I went to West Harbour Primary. So my family are Westies, went to West Harbour Primary. Then I moved on to St Dominic's College out west. I think I was already really good at economics and accounting. Also religious education. I think I was a scholar in RE. But economics and accounting was something that I enjoyed and I was good at high school. And then got to the end of high school and didn't know what I wanted to do, but knew that I had to go to university quickly. And my brother and my sister both studied business and they both are accountants. So I thought, well, I'll just do what they did. I'll just do what they did and go and study commerce. And so did a Bachelor of Business at AUT, which was really fortunate to get a scholarship for, majored in economics, and then got to the end of that and still thought, now what am I going to do? And so when I look back, it probably has been a journey of not quite sure what I want to do, but I'll just do something that I'm good at and I have to keep going. And then got to the end with the economics degree and didn't really know what type of job I wanted. So I fell into a role doing insolvency work, which was liquidations at the time. And there was an awesome experience because it exposed you to all the things that could go wrong. But after 6 months of doing that, I thought, I can't do this anymore. It's really hard work because you're essentially closing down and winding down companies, that people have put their whole heart and soul into. So I did that for 6 months, and then after that was really lucky to be offered essentially, why don't you just come and try forensics? And forensics I would describe as fraud and corruption investigations, and essentially just making sure that the money is being spent on things that it should do. So I started that, and that was almost 15 years ago and haven't looked back since. So it's sort of been a journey of falling into things, and by chance have really, really enjoyed it. I'm glad that I found it when I did.
Yeah, that's an amazing journey of, I guess, not knowing where you were going to end up, but just doing things that you enjoy. So when you were working for the company where you were in the area of insolvency, why was that difficult for you? Was it taxing emotionally?
Yeah, I think, sitting at the other end of the table with a director of a small business, and we were doing IRD liquidations. So these were businesses that had fallen behind, and all the things like, taxes that you should be paying. And so that was why they were being wound up. So to do that and to see sort of the stress that it would take on another person was just really hard. I sort of didn't really want to be involved in the just wrapping it up at the end. Sort of, I thought, there must be a better way to do this. So the emotional toll of seeing it on somebody else's face was really hard for me. So it's really, it's really important work. But for me, I just didn't feel like I was able to add value at that point because it was too late, really.
Yeah. And so what advice do you have for people who are working in an area where maybe they've trained, or maybe it's, a job that they've been able to get, but then once they get in there, they find that actually it doesn't align well with their values?
I think any experience that you get in your career is a good one. There'll be something, it might not feel like it at the time, but there is something that you will learn from it that you can take to your next career or your next role. And so I think just making sure that you have gotten the most you can possibly get out of that role, and you've essentially learnt everything there is to learn before going on to the next role or position. Just realising that it's not a wasted experience, you can sort of build on it. And so for that particular role, empathy, sort of empathy in the workplace and in a role where you're doing a really hard job, but someone has to do it, something that it taught me. How do you connect with somebody when you're essentially the bad guy, but get the job done and do it in a way that actually respects them? So it taught me a huge amount, and I think it's just treating them all as experiences, really. And our careers are, and it's really cliche, but our careers are marathons, they're not sprints. So, take the opportunity to learn from it, I think, would be the key thing.
So Lisa, are there a lot of Pasifika in accounting and finance?
No, no, not many across the board, not just Big Four, but actually just, the industry in general. Not enough. We definitely need more Māori and Pasifika people in roles like this.
So has it been getting better over the 14 years that you've been working in that sector?
To be completely honest, I don't think it's happened fast enough. So the rate of change hasn't happened quick. It just hasn't caught up with the rest of sort of population growth. So I think we need to do a much better job at providing opportunities for Māori and Pasifika in the industry. So I would say from my perspective, and having been in it for sort of almost 15 years, that we still don't have enough Māori or Pacific in this space.
So what are the factors? Is it that we are not graduating with BComs, or?
I think it's a bit of a pipeline issue, right? So the funnel is like this. So we essentially need lots of students studying the right subjects to be able to go into the university. And then from university, they need to be studying the right things for them to come into the industry. So I think we can do a much better job at attracting students and showing that this space is one that you can do exciting work. You can actually still do work where you can connect with community. It's not all boring sitting at your desk doing tax returns, which I'm sure some people like, but I think it's a bit of a funnel issue in that we need more students studying right back to high school to be able to therefore come through into workplaces like Deloitte.
I think that's a really important point that you raise about, attracting students into the sector, because when I look at the work that you're doing at Deloitte, it really does seem like an exciting place to work because you're doing all of this stuff for the community. I'm pretty sure a big part of that is Pasifika.
Yep.
Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing there?
Sure. So after doing, sort of corporate and doing financial crime and forensics for 13, 14 odd years, about a year, almost 2 years ago, I thought, oh, this is really cool. I really enjoy it. But for me personally, I want to do work that connects me with community and actually give back to my community more than I'm already doing, or was doing at the time. And so we started Pasifika, which is our Pasifika Services Group at Deloitte, as a way. We started it because we wanted more Pacific people in. So I was like, hang on, if we give them something that they can hold on to, because we give them work that they find meaningful and as an opportunity to connect back to community, that would be an awesome thing to do. So with Pasifika, essentially our goals are, A, we want to provide more opportunities for Pasifika to come and work at Deloitte and Big Four. We also want to be using the resources and tools and expertise that we have in Big Four firms like Deloitte to give back to community and provide access to resources and expertise that are actually really hard to come by.
Can you tell us about the meaning of the words Pasifika?
So Pasifika is a Ratuman phrase or Ratuman term, and essentially translates to break through waves, which I think is a good description for what we're trying to do here. And we want to do things differently. We want to accelerate change by essentially changing the way we deliver services to our community. So I got the Ratuman name in there.
There you go, girl.
I wouldn't have thought there'd be a Ratuman, services group at a big 4 firm like Deloitte. That's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're using your position of influence to raise profile for Pasifika in general, but also for Ratuman, so that's awesome. And so one of the areas that, I guess one of the things that you were doing at Pasifika is that you are serving the community, but you're also increasing cultural competency at Deloitte amongst your colleagues. So can you tell us about what you're doing there?
Yes, I think it's a bit of a journey, right, in terms of raising awareness around what Pasifika is, what are Pasifika values, how to engage with Pacific communities. And I think the best way we can do it is actually to bring more Pasifika people in, to actually educate and use as an opportunity to teach people about culture. But a couple of the examples, the first one is we ran cultural awareness training for our teams in Auckland and Wellington. Both sessions that we ran were sold out, so we had a really good turnout. It was run by our friends at ECG, Sarah Jane and Ralph. So that went really, really well. And so we did that. So essentially it was open for anyone in the office that wanted to come along. And we showed them videos about the dawn raids. We talked to them about the migration of Pacific people into New Zealand. We talked to them about values and how do you translate that into engagement. But last year, was actually a really big career highlight was our Pasifika cultural awareness training at the partner conference, which we're so thankful that you came along to help us with that. And essentially there was a room of 130 odd partners, so leaders from Deloitte across the country, having a 1-day conference, and for us to be able to have an hour and a half slot on Pacific and what does that mean, and to bring yourself and the others along to come and speak to them directly around why it's important. It was awesome. And we've had really good feedback, really positive feedback, and I'm really keen to just sort of make sure that we identify opportunities to talk to people about Pacific, because we need to be doing it all the time rather than treating initiatives like this as a once-off. So, ongoing journey, but I think we're getting there. We're starting to get some real cool momentum.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's really important to have that ongoing awareness training, because it's not like you do one workshop and then you know
100%.
everything that there is to know. So I think that's something really valuable that you're doing for your company, as well as for the Pacific community. And I think it's great that the partners at your company realise that there is a lot of value that the Pasifika community can bring.
And I think the other element to it is it means that our Pacific staff can actually see, hey, actually people want to learn about us, people want to hear our stories, they're actually really interested in what we have to say. And so the other benefit is that I think it just makes our Pacific staff feel welcome, feel engaged and feel included, because we've got people there and leaders in the firm that are saying, well, tell us more about yourself and tell us more about your culture. So I think that's a really important thing to have in terms of attracting Pasifika talent, but also retaining Pasifika talent. So, I love that part of my job at the moment.
I think that's awesome, because if I cast my mind back to when I was interning at a top tier law firm, 15 odd years ago, I think having that, recognition that people wanted to learn about my culture, that would have made all of the difference, and maybe I would be a lawyer now.
And I think it is really hard because we still don't have enough Pasifika across the profession. I think being the only one or being one of the few is really, really hard. It's difficult, and so the more opportunities that we can, take to show people how valued they are and why we need them, I think we need to take all of those. So it's awesome that our staff can be able to contribute to this in this way.
And so speaking about staff, so Deloitte is an international firm.
Yep.
And so is like passpao only for Pasifika in New Zealand?
Yeah, we don't have too many Pasifika staff that I've been able to find on the global registry across the globe. We've got a Tongan partner in London. We've also
Awesome.
got a Samoan director in Washington. So we don't have a huge number of Pasifika staff outside of New Zealand at the moment. So if we can use this as a platform to actually talk about Pasifika across the globe and to promote it outside of our borders, we're not quite there yet, but it'd be an awesome thing to aim for.
So you're currently doing some work with the Pacific Business Trust. What are some of the challenges that Pacific businesses face?
Just firstly with PBT and the Pacific Business Trust, they have got some cool initiatives. They've got some cool services available for Pacific communities and Pacific businesses. And so for us, anything that we can do to support what they're already doing, because this is really them, and we're using our resource to essentially help add some capability and capacity. So the examples that we've done over the last 12 months, so we run workshops. So we run workshops using Deloitte people to facilitate around business topics like accounting and tax and finance. But the main challenges that we find, and sorry, the reason we're doing this because the main challenges are access to expert resources, access to experts that can help you with all the boring back office things that you perhaps don't want to be doing. So I think that's a real issue, is lack of resource or access to resource, and also lack of networks as well, or networks can help accelerate your growth. So we're hopeful that by the work that we're doing, that we can actually provide some of that wraparound support for Pacific business. And I'd probably say the other main challenge is planning. The example I use is my husband's a builder. He's really good at what he does. He's really good at the tools. How can we help bring capability and resource around all the boring things that perhaps creatives and people that are really talented don't really want to be spending their time doing, and how do we do that in an efficient way that allows them to tick all the boxes that they need to tick and let them focus on the cool stuff that they enjoy delivering.
Yeah. So in your area of expertise, you've spent quite a lot of time figuring out what goes wrong in a business. Based on that, what advice do you have for Pasifika people who want to start their own business?
So I'd probably say planning, sort of thinking it through, just stopping going, not being drawn into the flashy parts of owning a business or what we perceive being a business owner is, which, more money, more time at home. It is really hard work, owning your own business and being an entrepreneur. So I think any planning that you can do upfront, work out who am I going to sell to, how am I going to sell it, how much I'm going to charge, how much money I'm going to be making, how can I plan and forecast, for the long term. I think that time is really, really valuable. And also just making sure that you are accessing all the support and all the resources that are available to get you off the ground, because there's a huge amount of services available for Pacific business owners to get, get their foot in the door. So just making sure you're aware of where those services sit and not being ashamed to reach out for help and getting the help when you need it. Because it is hard. It's really challenging being a Pacific business owner. So I think planning, making sure that you're sort of getting the support that you need and surrounding yourself with sort of the right networks and experts, I think is really, will hopefully get you on the right foot.
So if we go back to your first job, which was about people whose business was going through insolvency, how can you avoid that?
Pay your taxes. Pay your taxes. Bring in, if you need an accountant, and I know it's an extra cost, but it's really, good, money well spent. So I think just making sure that you're aware of all the obligations that you might have if you own your own business is really important, and not trying to avoid, all the boring things or the difficult things or difficult conversations you need to have. And there are people that you can bring in to actually support you with those areas. So not avoiding the tricky parts or the less glamorous parts, I think, is a good way to avoid that.
And I think it can really relate to what you were saying before about people, maybe they go into business because they like doing what they do, but it's a really big step up from being employed by someone else to do that thing that you love to then going out on your own. And what I'm hearing from you is when you go out on your own, you actually have to build a team around you that's going to do all those bits that you, maybe don't necessarily want or like to do.
I think so, and I think it's just identifying what is it you're really good at and you enjoy doing, and then therefore where are the gaps that you can get extra support in. It doesn't necessarily need to be through hiring people straight away. It could be just getting a really good accountant that can help you with your taxes and your accounts and help you manage your money. So I think it's identifying what you're not good at and sort of pulling in those people to help you in. And it might be family to start with, but there are really good, sort of accountants, advisors around available for small businesses.
So if people want to hear more about the work that you're doing with PBT, where can they go?
So with PBT, so directly to the Pacific Business Trust, they've got an awesome team there that are really, really keen to reach into the community and sort of tell people about their services. So by all means, come to me directly, really keen to help. But also the team at PBT, I'm sure would love to hear from our Pasifika businesses and entrepreneurs as well.
So before the waterworks start, maybe we should talk about COVID for a little bit, and how was that experience for your family?
There were good and bad parts about COVID. I mean, when I think of COVID, I think of lockdown, and so our sacrifices that we've made are nothing in comparison to what other families that have been directly impacted by COVID have had to go through. When we think about globally, sort of the sacrifices are small, right? But for me personally, probably the biggest impact was working from home. And working from home when my husband was still going to work, working at home with two little kids running around in the background, has been a learning experience or a bit of a challenge for both of us and also for all of us. And while it's been hard for me trying to do Zoom meetings and calls and getting work done during the daytime with kids, I just think about it must be extremely difficult for them to have mum on the phone physically here but not mentally, emotionally available. And so I think we may be underestimating the actual impact that has on children and the families when we're trying to work from home, which we're all trying to do and doing our best. But it's been difficult. It's been difficult, but nothing in comparison to the sacrifices that others have had to make. Really miss being able to see people though, sort of during lockdown. And we're lucky my parents live down the road from us and they've been in our bubble, which has been has been awesome. But my brother lives up in Mangawhai, so Zoom calls. Sister lives in France at the moment, so they're doing it extremely tough at the moment, extremely tough in terms of the length of time they've had in lockdown and the number of cases around them. But so we're pretty lucky really overall in terms of what we've been able to do and can do now.
Absolutely. So what were some of the techniques that you use to help, I guess, calm yourself down, like working from home and also being a homeschool teacher?
I don't know if I have any good tips, to be honest, but I think it's just recognising that it's really difficult, not trying to force the children to keep quiet the whole day. So my children have appeared in most of my client calls during lockdown, and that's okay. And then
totally.
People have been really, really good about it. Sort of, hang on, I just got to go on mute while I go and tell my kids something, or hang on, I'm just going to sort of sort out, stuff while you carry on. And so I think people have been extremely accommodating, and people understand because we're all in the same boat together at this time. So that's made it a little bit easier. And I think the other practical tip was just making sure you're blocking out time during a diary, because somehow we end up with back-to-back Zoom calls all day, and then you get to like 2 o'clock and the kids haven't had lunch or you haven't cooked dinner. And I think just practically trying to allow yourselves breaks during the day is probably a really good thing to try and implement, or a discipline to have as well.
Yeah, I definitely learned that lesson over lockdown as well, because it was like, oh, now I can have 5 Zoom calls a day instead of 3 face-to-face meetings. And it's like, no, I can't.
No. And then knowing that the end, like when the day finishes and when you can go back to doing all the things that you need to do at home. Otherwise, I think the days and the nights just actually blur into one big cycle. So you get to 7 o'clock and you're extremely tired because you've actually done a huge amount, but just haven't physically gotten up and gone anywhere.
Yeah, it's like confined to that space. 100%. So what is your advice to anyone out there who's maybe feeling isolated in their profession or their place of work?
It is hard to be one that represents a whole community in any space, but I think seeing it as an opportunity to go, well, hey, I can be the first one. But I would say the advice would be to find your people that will support you, and they may not necessarily sit in your organisation. They may sit elsewhere. They may sit at a competitor. They may sit in somebody else, sort of another organisation in the same industry. And I think reaching out, LinkedIn is an awesome way, oh my goodness,
it's such a good tool.
of connecting with people that may not be in the same organisation but have very similar issues, but also passions and desires to change things. So I think social media is a great way of doing it. There might be some events or networks, associations for your industry that you can get involved with. Finding other people that listen, be able to share the experience, I think is really important. So finding the people is hard, but once you find them, holding on to them and being really open around, this is what I'm feeling, you're feeling the same, and if you are, like, what are you doing, is really important as well. And finding allies within your own organisation. So while they might not be Pasifika or of the same ethnicity or background to you, hopefully you can find one ally that will still understand what you're going through and be able to support you through it in the spaces they're in, I think is really important. It's been a challenge. It has been a real challenge to be one of a few over time, and it's definitely getting better. But I think finding people that can relate and not limiting yourself to your own organisation is really important as well.
Yeah. I think that's really wonderful because, what you're doing is creating a space for people who feel isolated to be able to share experiences. But further than that, you're looking at what are the things we can do to attract and retain talent. And then also how do we need, how can we help our colleagues to understand us more?
Yeah, our Pascal group, we welcome anyone that essentially wants to learn about Pacific and be involved in working with Pacific communities. So while the majority are of Māori or Pasifika heritage, we do have non-Māori and Pasifika that have come along and they've bought into the vision, they get it, they want to learn more, they're engaging with Pacific communities in a sort of an informed way that perhaps they didn't know how to do before. And so I think it's just a really cool opportunity to tell people our stories and making sure that we're bringing others, because we need the masses. And if we limit ourselves to just saying, okay, well, it's only for Pacific, it's just going to take a little bit longer. So, I'm stoked and feel really privileged that we have non-Pasifika in our organisation that want to learn and contribute as well. So I'm really thankful for their support and their friendship during this whole journey and process as well.
Yeah, we definitely need allies.
100%, yeah.
So Lisa, what are your hopes for Pacific peoples in New Zealand, and how can you contribute to that through the work that you're doing in your professional career?
Hard question, really hard question. I would describe it as, I just think that every generation needs to leave it in a better space than when you inherited it, right? And anything that we can do to accelerate that change and growth for our communities, awesome. So, in terms related to the work that I do, I'd love to see increased number of Pasifika businesses that are doing really well, that are sustainable, that are here in 10, 20 years' time, that are growing, that are actually employing Pasifika people and providing opportunities for Pasifika in their businesses. So from a work perspective and what I'd like to see for our community, it's prosperous communities that are thriving that are sustainable and are really resilient, and that we've brought everybody else on the journey with us as well. So growth and making sure we're leaving things in a better space, I think, is the ultimate goal for us in the work that we're trying to do.
So you've just mentioned that each generation has to do its bit, and I thought, you have had an enormous amount of success in the career that you've had and the path that you've chosen. How did the previous generation contribute to that for you?
Oh, this is where the tea's going to start. Look, I have been really fortunate to have awesome role models, right? And I haven't had to look far for good, strong role models. And the role models for me are my parents. And I sort of think about the decisions that they've had to make to get me to this position. And I imagine it was really, really hard. Sort of the decisions that my mum would have made. Oh, I'm going to start crying. The decisions that my mum would have had to make to leave Rotuma, to leave her siblings. She's got 9, to come to Fiji as a teenager to look for work in Fiji. That's a big sacrifice, big decision. I think of my grandfather, my dad's dad, who would have left China, mainland China, as a teenager and got on a boat and somehow end up in Fiji with his brother, as a big decision and sacrifice. And then the same for my dad, right? So I think just along the journey, there's a huge amount of sacrifice, hard decisions that have been made to get me here. The decision to leave Fiji and leave extended family, I think is such a pivotal moment for me and for my family, and I'm forever grateful for the sacrifices that that has taken. So I don't take for granted the role that I'm in. I don't take for granted that position that I have, but really is a result of hard work and sacrifice, and not taking the easy way out. When I'm sure it would have been really easy to stay in Fiji and to stay with family, but I think there are lots of small moments in our lives that can completely change our trajectory, say that word wrong, and so it's brave. I think it's just super brave, and really grateful to my parents, especially my mum, sort of working at Carter Holt Harvey factory for 30 odd years, doing backbreaking on your feet labour. My dad, who's a mechanic, was a mechanic and still tosses around even though he's retired. Hard work and sacrifice, I think, are all the things that have got me where I am, and that's not me, that's my parents and my siblings, really. So great, extremely grateful, and maybe I'll stop where I start crying and we're on the makeup.
Yeah, I think, when you talk about sacrifice, I think for, us living in the modern age, maybe we take for granted that, we can still call people and, FaceTime people, that we can fly back, although we can't fly at the moment. But, even just what you were talking about before, that even to this day, it's a 3-day boat ride from Fiji to Rotuma. So they really were giving up a lot when they decided to migrate to different places.
And I think coming here at a time when they did it back in the 80s, there weren't that many Pasifika people here, and so the landscape for Pacific would have looked quite different. And so I imagine the challenges would have been huge, quite different to what we're dealing with at the moment. So it's just extra hard, it's all extra hard, and extremely grateful.
Yeah. Your parents must be very proud of you, and also your siblings, all going to university and receiving an education. So I'm sure that made their sacrifice worthwhile.
I hope so. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think now it's time for our quick fire questions. So, what movie can you watch over and over again and not get sick of?
Coming to America.
Nice.
I haven't seen number 2.
Oh, but we just watched it.
Was it good?
Yeah. It was if you love the original, then it's a fun follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I won't watch it then. Don't want to ruin it.
What actor would you choose to play you in a biopic of your life?
Far out. Beyonce.
Why not? I can totally see that.
It wouldn't be very, what's the word? Accurate is probably the right word, 100%, but we can all dream. So we'll go with Beyonce.
I think it would be totally accurate. If you could do COVID, well, if you had to do COVID lockdown again, where would you do it?
Fiji. Yep,
Nice.
Fiji.
Yep, they've done really well during the pandemic.
Yeah, it would be nice to still have some sun and beach. So Fiji.
If you could choose a superpower, what would it be?
Oh gosh, these are really hard. Go back in time.
Nice. Yeah,
Go back
I
in time.
am totally down for some time travel. Yeah. Which era would you visit?
Just to meet family members that I haven't had a chance to meet before. So not
that's
too
cool.
far back, but a couple of people in my family that I would have loved to have spent more time with.
Nice. And what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
These are hard. That we're all on our own journeys, and our journeys all look really different. But the biggest thing that we can do is just think about what is it that we like doing, what is it that we're good at, and how can I take that and use it in a way that will impact the people around us in a really positive way. So being kind to yourself, but also recognizing that you bring something and figuring out how you're going to build on that and actually share that with others, I think would be awesome advice to receive.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for
Thank
coming
you.
on the show and imparting your advice to our viewers. And it's been so wonderful to hear about your lessons from your career, your family life, and all of the community work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here. Thank you.
Three, two, one, cheese. 2, 1, cheese. Cool. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
That's all.
No, down, sorry. Yeah,
Up,
perfect.
down, up,
Got
down.
it.
Cool. And cut.
I was like, shit, those hungry just. I watched your last season, so I.
You can blame the Sarah.